Hey, have you ever had one of those moments where you get the feeling that other people are not quite experiencing the same world as you? Maybe you've been at a concert or a conference or some kind of event and you're talking about it with others afterwards, and all you can think about is the nose full of perfume that you had from the person behind you that made it really hard to focus on anything else, or the constant bumping from your next door neighbor's elbow that kept pulling you out of the moment. Or perhaps you found yourself counting the 9.5 minutes as the air conditioner cycled on and off. These things are what you remember from the event, and they're things that nobody else even took any notice of. Or maybe it's the other way around, and actually you were completely immersed in what was going on. You were hanging off every word of the person speaking, or mesmerized by the sensory intricacies of the performance. And then you're about to express this and how much you enjoyed it with others. And somebody says, "Oh man, that was so boring." And everybody else agrees. And you're like, "Oh, okay." It turns out there's been radically different experiences had subjectively by people in the same space. Like the meeting where you pick up on 17 layers of subtext from different people all jostling for power and position. Then you sort of go out afterwards and a co-worker, they come out from the meeting and they're smiling, and you assume, oh yeah, they had the same experience too. They've picked up on that lack of coherent agreement. And you say, maybe sarcastically, but perhaps not quite sarcastically enough, "Wow, that went well." And they agree. "Yeah, it did, didn't it? It went really well." Oh, hold on. They do think it went well. I hope for their sake they're right, but I'm pretty sure that we were sitting in completely different meetings, even though we were in the same room.
We're about to witness the greatest miracle of the machine age.
The Gentle Rebel Podcast.
I'm so glad you could come. This is going to be such an exciting day. I hope you enjoy it. I think you will.
In this episode of the Gentle Rebel Podcast, I want to explore differential susceptibility, which is a key concept in high sensitivity research across various fields, including things like child development and mental health. The pioneering researchers around high sensitivity and differential susceptibility are Jay Belsky and Michael Plewis, who looked to kind of challenge this old idea that equated increased sensitivity with increased vulnerability, showing instead that highly sensitive individuals aren't simply more negatively impacted by stimulation and adverse environments, but they're more positively impacted by favorable conditions as well. In other words, their nervous system is more responsive to everything, amplifying the intensity of whatever it is that they are subjected to and the conditions that they are within. And so this research reveals that the same trait that can leave highly sensitive people at times struggling more than others in harsh environments or adverse conditions also lets them thrive in greater ways when they're in supportive environments and in conditions that are conducive to their nervous system, showing that high sensitivity can be a context-dependent advantage. So, differential susceptibility is sometimes described using the metaphor of plants, so orchids, dandelions, and tulips. And on the low end of the sensitivity spectrum, a dandelion can survive and grow in all manner of environments, including hostile environments where there's high stress and minimal resources. And they will be pretty consistent in terms of how they grow across different conditions. And then on the high end of the sensitivity spectrum, an orchid shows capacity for beauty and growth when raised in a supportive, nurturing environment, but maybe more vulnerable to the negative impacts of stressful or resource-scarce conditions. And then tulips sit somewhere in between. One of my little bugbears is when metaphors take on a life of their own and they become, or they get used as like defining factors as people start to confuse them with the thing that they are being used to illustrate, especially when the metaphor isn't actually all that ideal. Something intended to illustrate one thing becomes a framework for categorizing people. And this is a good example of that, where a metaphor that for me and many people that I've worked with and talked to about it over the years suggest, actually, this isn't all that helpful for me when I think about, understanding my own sensitivity, and especially when I think about talking about it to other people. And I think this metaphor was intended to communicate that sensitivity isn't about vulnerability, but it's about variations in environmental responsiveness across humans. And so, we have a constant desire to label and box and categorize people. So we end up asking, am I an orchid? Am I a tulip? Am I a dandelion? Rather than, what conditions seem to help me thrive? How can we design spaces that work for more of us as human beings? People aren't flowers, plants, and weeds, and we're all part of the same spectrum as a social species that has evolved for cooperation and collaboration as part of our collective survival strategy. So rather than picking different plants that stand perhaps distinct and separate from one another, we might do better to pick elements of an interrelated ecosystem that engage and rely on one another as part of that broader picture. People who are more sensitive are also more responsive to their environment, for better or worse. This is what the research around differential susceptibility is indicating. We might look at this from two perspectives. So there's like the long game and the here and now. So the long game being, how the early environment shapes an individual and builds patterns and stories of safety, protection, connection, and defense that then get carried into adulthood and show up in maybe some of the defense mechanisms that we employ and the way that we go into environments and situations and various contexts, and also the relationship we have with the idea of change or our belief in the things that we're capable of doing and that kind of thing. And then there's the here and now. So how the current environment helps or hinders someone in their pursuits, in their projects, in their endeavors. And so when we use the word environment, we're talking about more than simply, a physical space. It's more than just the place that we're in. We might also think about the people that we're around, the pressures that we're under, and the broader context that we're operating in. So sort of a systemic framework that we are trying to function within. And so we're looking here at the level of the nervous system, not just in terms of utility and usefulness. It's not just about the kind of utility and usefulness of an environment or a person or whatever it is. It's about how the impact of those things on the nervous system of a sensitive person. And so you might recognize this if you think about the impact of certain people on how calm and relaxed you feel. It's not simply about the presence of people in general. It's about the kind of energy that a particular person might contribute to or suck from you. You might have a certain person or a team that you feel really free to be creative or productive or playful with. And then you notice there are other people where actually you just can't relax. You don't feel that sense of calmness around. This stuff isn't mindset. It's not sort of thought stuff. It's not in the head. It's in the nervous system. It's how our body, beneath our thoughts, processes and absorbs and responds to these various environmental factors. And for the sensitive individual, when we feel safe, when we feel relaxed at that level in the state of our being, we are more free to engage, to enjoy, to explore the flow of our creative spirit. I was thinking about, my relationship with songwriting and the fact that, when I feel relaxed, when I'm maybe alone with an instrument and not being overheard, or I'm with collaborators who support the messy, playful phase of creativity without expectation or critical judgment or pressure, there's a sense of calm fearlessness that can take over, and I feel it sort of through my body, and then I'm able to explore and experiment and play with music freely. But if the space that I'm in feels like judgmental or there's some pressure within it, it's like my nervous system starts to kind of slam on the brakes and I'm unable to really function in that freely creative way. For example, if I'm feeling like I'm being overheard when I'm noodling around or playing with ideas, I might feel self-conscious, or I might feel like I'm taking up space in somebody else's sensory environment. And this means that I can't relax enough to produce my best work, I suppose, and to freely explore, especially when I'm, writing songs and playing with lyrics or just spouting nonsense, which is the first part of my process often. Who knows what is going to come out? And I've noticed on the flip side of that, there are people who are completely nonplussed by those kinds of situations. They can just produce their best stuff despite being in what I find that, I guess, internally noisy environment, that place where I can't relax at the level of my nervous system. Other people are like, yeah, I can just flow with this. This is fine. So it's that kind of sense that other people aren't quite as impacted by their environment as me, I suppose. And this is why I've always found, pressured group work situations quite an unproductive way of working for me. I notice myself kind of overthinking things or offering performative responses and ideas rather than being able to fully access the depths of my creativity and my play when, in those group work situations. It's like I will give lip service to things. I would just try and give something that's adequate in terms of the expectations of those in there, but it's not coming from a place of creative depth. And I think this is true for many introverts, many highly sensitive people who, if working with groups, likely need time away from that group if they are going to kind of access their best thinking, their best sources of ideas. And this is not a matter of social anxiety or shyness. This is that differential susceptibility. A highly sensitive nervous system functions best in an environment that's conducive for it. And the exact characteristics of that conducive environment are going to differ from person to person. It's not the same for everyone. Not every highly sensitive person needs the same things. So what works for me is not necessarily going to work for somebody else. Sensitivity intersects with other aspects of our personality, our life experience, our individual differences, our preferences. It doesn't prescribe our personal tastes, the things that we like, our opinions, our preferences, our beliefs, our values. That's why I tend on the whole to shy away from the term like-minded as well when talking about highly sensitive people, because I think we connect not when we think the same, but when our nervous systems give one another a knowing wink and a nod beneath the surface of the interaction, beneath the surface of language and thought. Maybe you can think of other scenarios like this that you've experienced in your life. I'd love to hear, any stories that you have around this. So, how does differential susceptibility shape our lives? So starting with the impact of early environments. So growing up in a supportive environment as a highly sensitive person isn't so much about whether your sensitivity was celebrated as a strength. It's about whether it was acknowledged and accepted as a natural part of you and not something to fix or push down or avoid. In supportive environments, a highly sensitive child learns their way of experiencing the world, knowing that it's neither superhuman nor a problem. It's just how they're wired. And so the supportive messaging that comes with that is that, when things feel like too much, the caregiver and the child are going to figure out what helps together so that they can do what needs to be done without leaving that child in a constant state of dysregulation. And it's also the reassurance that, it's okay to need and want and prefer different things than others seem to. People are allowed to prefer and like whatever it is that they like, and so are you. You've got the freedom to express what that might be. And, an example might be a sensitive child who gets really overstimulated by chaotic birthday parties. They might withdraw into themselves when they're sort of thrust into that environment, or they might melt down, and just the too muchness becomes an outburst of a meltdown as a way to fight or escape the bombardment on the nervous system. And instead of shaming them for overreacting or for being too shy, we might find ways to just allow that pause to check mechanism that is there for most highly sensitive people, that scanning for signs of safety and signals of danger, so that I know that it's okay to proceed. Allowing that to play out in their nervous system. It might be a case of letting them observe from the sidelines first, giving them time and space to assimilate into the situation gradually, rather than just throwing them into the deep end and saying, right, yeah, just get on with it, you'll be fine. And this then allows them to be present and to bring themselves to the party, rather than just kind of dealing with that complete overstimulation, wishing that they were anywhere else but here, just trying to get through it rather than being in it. And when they're in that state of dysregulation, you're unable to focus and operate from a state of natural calmness. But that natural calmness is accessible when we, just accommodate and change the environment, or change the stuff around the environment, or the way that the child merges with that context or with that situation. A highly sensitive child growing up in an unsupportive home or school environment might look like kind of exposure to unpredictable shouting or uncertain routines, emotional neglect. And the nervous system is wired to process everything deeply in a highly sensitive child, becomes like a seismograph during an earthquake. And it's in this constant state of anticipation and alertness. And this can lead to a state of hypervigilance that can take over. So the highly sensitive child in that unsupportive environment might master the art of reading rooms by necessity. So noticing little signs that conflict is on the horizon, maybe a tightened jaw or a shifting tone in someone's voice that can be anticipated and mitigate escalation before the threat manifests in a broader way. But this survival skill in a particular situation can then become a burden beyond that context. It might start to leave that person reading every raised eyebrow as a source of danger, every door that shuts loudly as a slam that's a potential crisis that is ensuing. And so they might then learn to take responsibility for the well-being and the peace of others, people-pleasing, fawning, appeasing others, in order to control some element of the chaotic and unpredictable actions that they're used to from other people in that formative environment. And so research led by Bianca Acevedo shows that HSPs with trauma develop faster threat detection, but this leads them to the cost of living in constant dysregulation and exhaustion. When this alertness burns too hot for too long, the nervous system can then tip into a state of shutdown. So emotions compressing into a kind of narrow band where, grief, for example, might come out as numbness. Joy might just feel like this faint background noise. Sensory richness drains away. Food loses flavor. Music becomes noise. There's a kind of too muchness to everything, as well as a lack of anything meaningful, a lack of potency. You might find yourself just sort of staring blankly during situations where others are emotionally very responsive, wondering like, why do I not feel anything here? And this isn't an absence of sensory sensitivity. It's overwhelm that kind of moves into this shutdown state. The body's last-ditch effort to survive what the sensitive nervous system can no longer endure in that sense. And it's a desensitization in order to cope with the volume of stimulating information that flows through the nervous system. And another aspect of differential susceptibility was highlighted in, I think, a 2018 study in development and psychopathology, which found that highly sensitive people with childhood trauma had higher rates of anxiety. They also responded more profoundly to interventions such as therapy. So their sensitivity becomes the bridge to their own recovery in this sense. And this is something that I've noticed in many highly sensitive people that I've worked with over the years. They're more likely to respond positively to support. And interestingly, I think it's support that sparks something in them a lot of the time, rather than simply being the result of implementing somebody else's suggestions or advice. I often joke that when in this state of receptivity, many highly sensitive people can find life-transforming nuggets of gold in the worst books, in the worst courses, not because they were put there deliberately by the author and actually there is a nugget of gold in the book, but because they stimulate the person's creative spirit and the dot connecting abilities. And so you might be reading something that is like truly awful, but actually using any prompt to explore and find answers that are there within. And it just sort of stimulates this dot connecting thing that means that, yeah, you can use anything as a form of creative prompt and self-exploration. And again, I think this is linked to differential susceptibility because it highlights how much more or less a highly sensitive person might take from a situation depending on the state of their nervous system and the readiness of their creative spirit to engage with what is in front of us. When highly sensitive people find ourselves in spaces that support us, that get us, whether that's a calm home, an accommodating workplace, or an emotionally attuned relationship, something is able to shift and grow, not because we've changed as a person, but because the sensitivity has the room to breathe, the space to be what it is. And so research from Michael Plewis, who I said, was one of the founding researchers bringing differential susceptibility and high sensitivity together, shows that, I suppose what many highly sensitive people probably feel and know instinctively, that supportive conditions don't just prevent overwhelm, they actually allow the highly sensitive person to thrive. And so you might notice when you're calm, your empathy becomes a really useful tool in social situations, maybe in conflicts. You might sense things that are unspoken and step into a role of an objective mediator in the center of things, able to kind of balance off, as I said earlier, noticing those levels of subtext and just bringing that out and being a balancing presence in the situation. Creativity and playfulness flow more freely when you're not battling sensory overload. And even ordinary moments can feel richer for a highly sensitive person when you're not wasting energy pretending to be something that you're not, or donning a mask or wearing a shield as a form of protection against the overstimulating stuff, the noise in the world around you, and also as a way to kind of fit in the expectations other people have. It's obviously not about creating perfect conditions or withdrawing from the unpredictable chaos that the world often throws our way. Rather, it's about noticing and experimenting with environments so that the nervous system isn't constantly fighting against it or constantly on alert within it. And when talking about setting up environments conducive for highly sensitive people, it's not simply about developing conditions for sensitive people to cope. It's about understanding that the right conditions allow highly sensitive people to thrive and to contribute in ways that they are uniquely wired for, to enhance the culture, not simply to manage within it or to survive within it. And this brings us to the central question that I suppose emerges from this topic, which is, how do we actually build these supportive environments, especially in a world that's not designed for sensitivity and doesn't really have any interest in changing in that sense. And I think it's worth taking this as the starting point. that the systems that frustrate us are often failing everyone in different ways. And in an overall sense, a system that doesn't accommodate its sensitive people is a system that misses out on a huge source of potential value. This potential is here. And, we've seen how differential susceptibility means that highly sensitive people experience environments more intensely. But there is research that points to the importance of person-centered approaches rather than universalizing processes that assume everyone is the same. And again, this is in the interests of everyone, not just in the interests of highly sensitive people. And so to go back to that context of group working, so Deal and Struber found that traditional groups tend to generate fewer and worse ideas than the same number of people working alone. And this was put down to production blocking, which is kind of waiting your turn, and evaluation anxiety. And then Nemeth et al. In 2004 showed that structured solitary work and debate yields deeper contributions than free-for-all brainstorming in groups. And then Paulus and Brown in 2007 showed that hybrid approaches, so individual to group to individual, work best for deep processes. So instead of forcing, all these different shaped pegs that we are as humans into one type of hole, we need to build a range of holes, normalizing different approaches. Like, I need space, I need time, I need quiet to think, just as valid as I think out loud and I talk, I express myself to process my feelings. Helping us know how we do our best processing and how we engage with our creativity in the best way for us is vital. Not assuming that just because something works best for me, then it's going to work best for you. And likewise, just because it works best for these people, it doesn't mean it's going to work best for these people. And this applies to people within that kind of highly sensitive bracket as well. As I said earlier, we don't all operate in the same way. We don't all need the same things or find the same environments or the same conditions conducive to our way of being. Our nervous systems all develop in ways unique to each of us based on all kinds of things like our life situations, the experiences that we've been through, and our own, personalities. We all have different likes and dislikes, tastes, preferences, things that irritate us, bugbears, and curiosities. So there we go. If today's conversation about differential susceptibility has struck a chord or resonated in some way, this is just one piece we explore in the HSP Owner's Guide, which, basically aims to help people understand sensitivity. So whether you are a highly sensitive person or somebody who's really important to you that is, you can, get a free copy of that. Just go to the-haven.co and pop your email address in and you will receive a link to that. And there's also a printable version that you'll get if you want to print it out and turn it into a little mini zine as well, you can do that if you want to give it to somebody else or whatever. So I'll drop a link below to that as well. We will explore hopefully more concepts from that guide in upcoming episodes. I'd like to maybe make this a bit of a series and unpack those things that are there in micro form and explore what they mean for us and to put some meat on the bones of it all. Cool. That's all I have for you today in this episode. Thank you so much for joining me. I will be back soon with another episode of the Gentle Rebel podcast. Until then, do remember that you are an artist and that the world needs your art. So go and make somebody's day in some kind of way. All right. Bye-bye.
So shines a good deed in a weary world.
Can all be angels in disguise.